or that I was speaking about in the last slide, we're going to observe here. So if you can understand this slide, you can understand most of the things that I'm going to speak about, probably most of the things that Katie's going to speak about. You're going to see them right here, right now. And even before I press play, hopefully you start to see some of these things. So I just want you to look at the vertical stack of this guy on the left, who is the good guy, if you haven't noticed that already, versus the good guy on the right, who maybe is still probably very good, but not as good, okay? And I'm not even saying that this is why the guy on the left is better than the guy on the right. It just looks prettier to me. It looks better to me. It looks more organized and looks more efficient. And he is better, okay? So first thing we're going to see is a body that is pretty much stacked over his foot versus a guy that looks like he's falling forward. And also a guy that looks like he doesn't have a very happy lower back at the moment, all right? Doesn't have much of a glute, doesn't have much of a hamstring, doesn't have much abs, has a lot of hip flexors, a lot of quads, doesn't get much posterior expansion. I guarantee you in this study that they did, this was from a study, in this study that they did, they're not talking about rib cage mechanics. They're not talking about posterior expansion and inlets and outlets and all these things. But that is what hopefully you can see here now, because that's what I see. This is what I see. I see where I see his limitations. Okay, so this is what I want you to learn to be able to see, not in a more dynamic way. Okay, so we even see like a knee that's going to extend. We see all these things, and then when I go out and sit in a coffee shop, I see people walking. This guy on the right is what I see all the time, all day, every day. People that are falling forwards. They need their spinal erectors to keep them up. They say that their glutes aren't activating, which obviously they are activating, but how are they ever going to get enough power out of those glutes in a position like this? So this is walking, this is running, this is people lying down. You're going to see that big arch in their back. Okay, so I'm just going to watch this video play a little bit and stop it at a couple of different stages. So first thing I want you to look at is the guy on the left, okay? Or both guys in fairness. But before his foot hits the floor, we're going to see a lot of pre-tension in these muscles around the knee. Can you see my mouse, yeah?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, so we have a calf, hamstring, quad. And there's going to be a lot of pre-tension around these muscles, or a certain amount of pre-tension, because if there's not, the reflexes aren't sharp enough for when his foot hits the floor, and we're talking about milliseconds here. Reflexes aren't quick enough to put enough tension in the muscles quick enough to keep the joint safe. So what he has to have is a certain amount of pre-tension in the muscles before his foot hits the floor. Now, what you're going to see sometimes in older population is actually they have way too much pre-tension in the muscles. They look so robotic when they move. You'll see pre-tension, especially a lot of pre-tension around the spine. There's co-contractions around the spine, the pelvis, the rib cage, and I think a lot of the co-contractions that we see around the abdomen, around the torso, are because they can't create good co-contractions around the lower body, and co-contractions are the things that keep us safe. So if I can't if my brain doesn't trust my lower body to disperse the force that's coming up into the body, then it's going to have more tension around the spine, the lower back, because it needs a way of protecting it. It doesn't care about how fast and how loose and how fluid you can move. It cares about being safe. Okay, so that's why I was saying we're talking mostly about the lower limb here, but as someone who's older, if I can increase the pre-tensioning around the lower leg and increase the movement options and the loading at the foot and the ankle and the Achilles, then I'm probably going to help their lower back. And I see that every single day. I'm probably going to help their neck as well, okay? So foot before it hits the floor, pre-tension around the lower leg. Foot when it hits the floor, we're going to see a slightly flexed knee, and it's not going to change that much as we continue on. If we look at the guy on the left versus the guy on the right, which looks prettier to you? I know which one I prefer to be. And if we look at the guy on the left versus the guy on the right, if you're sitting outside your coffee shop, I guarantee you see a lot of guys on the right or girls on the right who are running like this. I don't mean to say guy all the time. Girls on the right who are running like this, okay, and walking like this. So what does this guy on the left has? He has mid-foot pressure. He has co-contractions around the knee joint. He has ribs that are staying down, and he has a pelvis. It's not in a posterior tilt. He's not in a tuck, but he's certainly not in a big anterior tilt like this guy. Okay, so these posterior tilts that we train and stuff like that, when we go and do our movement, we're probably not getting into as much as we train in. But if we can get into a little bit more when we're doing some of our movements and our training in the gym and our breathing work, then it's allowing us to have access to both sides of the coin rather than just being this guy who has a pelvis that's really in a nasty position here, okay? Now, when we look at this, the guy on the right easily, this could be just have been a bad day for him, and he could have been very, very, very stressed, and that's just ribs that are very, very elevated. Okay, so these things are dynamic. They're not stuck in one place. They're dynamic. But if he even is stressed and he had a really bad night's sleep and his girlfriend broke up with him and his ribs are going to be elevated, they're still, I would expect to see him, even in his most relaxed state, he's still going to be a little bit like this because he's gone very extreme here. Okay, so knee joint, I just want you to watch the knee joint here. It still hasn't really changed place, so that isometric around the knee joint that we're looking for is still there. I still have my nice midfoot pressure, and he's going to start to get hip extension. His hip is going to start to extend through before his knee starts to extend back. Okay, so, maybe I should go back to the first one. Where should I go? Maybe I should go back to here. So watch his knee still in a flex position. Foot is working hard. Hip is working hard. Knee is still in a flex position. All these Olympic lifts and people that are training triple extension and aggressive extension of the knee joint, this is not what we observe happening in good movers. We don't get that aggressive triple extension a lot of the time. We get a foot and a hip that are doing work while a knee is in an isometric in the middle. Okay, still hasn't extended. This guy is falling forward. This guy has lost all his push. He has no push left. Even here, he has very little push left, no push. Here, very little push. He's up on that toe. This guy is still a little bit more on the ball of the foot. He has a lot more push left in him. Knee is a little bit higher over here versus pelvis is a mess over here. And eventually then we start to see that this hip, this knee, and this ankle all will extend through. But he's still in a nice tall position versus this, okay? So this is what I think people are going the right. People are training this in the gym all of the time. This is what they're training. This is how they're walking. This is how they're running. This is how I think we should be doing it on the left, okay? So that's a lot of the things that I spoke about in the last slide. Here, we'll see a lot of these things happening just in that one video. So if you just understood that, then you're in a much better place, okay? Does anyone have questions on that? Are we pretty good? So one of my mentors, Dave O'Sullivan, this is a very, 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 this is a very common study. You're going to see this quite a bit now that you've actually seen it, but you're going to see this all over Instagram and social media and stuff like that. One of my mentors, Dave O'Sullivan, first shared it probably a couple of years ago with me, but we would have seen it before. Even just look at the guy on the left here. Look how squatted he is. I don't know if any of you heard of a Darian Barr. He talks about squatted running and staying a little bit more squatted. This is a guy that's squatted. This is a guy that's under control versus the guy on the right who's falling. And you might say, I don't sprint, so it doesn't matter to me. But sprinting is just an expression of incredible human movement. And we all need to have that. So even if it's a granny who needs to be able to walk up the stairs, a granny is much better off being organized into positions like the guy on the left versus the guy on the right, okay? So some of the co-contractions, just to speak a little bit more about that. So I see it as like nature's way of protecting us. So we've evolved, or whatever way you wanted to look at it. Our bones are now shaped in a certain way, our muscles are shaped in a certain way, and the anatomy of those does actually matter, and they do have different properties to them. So we get co-contractions around all the joints in our body. Every single joint, muscles will co-contract